under the endless skies of the Wild West, where the wind carried the whispers of old secrets and the sun baked the earth into a canvas of golden dust, there lived a woman named Clara, who had once believed in love the way children believe in miracles, but after betrayal had seared her heart like fire against fragile skin. She had sworn with every trembling breath that she would never allow her soul to bend. Again, never allow her spirit to trust. Never allow her heart to beat with hope for another man's touch. For love had failed her so deeply that it left her hollow, clinging only to the strength of her own hands as she managed her late father's ranch on the edge of a small town where gossip travelled faster than stagecoaches, and where the wild horses roamed free, mirroring the restless ache within her. She poured her days into work, into repairing fences, tending to cattle, battling the storms that swept across the plains. And yet, despite all her strength, there lingered nights when she lay awake staring at the wooden beams of her ceiling, remembering how promises had once felt like shelter before they turned into daggers. But still she carried on, until the morning came when her fence along the northern pasture broke after a fierce storm, the posts leaning like defeated soldiers, and she knew she had neither the strength nor the time to repair it alone. Yet her pride wouldn't let her ask for help until fate brought a quiet cowboy riding down her dirt path. A stranger whose presence seemed to carry both calm and mystery. His horse, a steady creature of chestnut brown, his hat tilted low to shield eyes that watched the world with careful silence. And when he spoke, it was not with the smooth charm of men who knew how to break hearts, but with the humble tone of someone who carried scars of his own. "Looks like your fence took a beating," he said simply, his voice steady like a low song carried by the prairie wind. And Clara bristled, her chin lifting in defiance, for she did not want pity nor attention. "I can handle it," she shot back, though her hands ached and her tools were scattered. And the man only nodded, dismounting with a calm patience that unsettled her. "I believe you can," he replied. "But sometimes 2 sets of hands save a day sooner than one." And without waiting for her permission, he began to gather fallen posts, his muscles moving with quiet strength, his silence speaking louder than any flirtation. And Clara stood frozen, torn between anger at his intrusion and a strange pull she had not felt in years, a pull that terrified her, for she remembered the vow she had made never to love again. Yet as the hours passed and the sun climbed high, she found herself watching the way he worked, steady, respectful, never once looking at her in a way that made her feel vulnerable, only in a way that honored the land and the labor it demanded. And slowly, as dust clung to their skin and sweat streaked their foreheads, Clara felt something stir, deep inside, a question she had buried long ago. Could love be quiet, gentle and healing, rather than wild, burning, and destructive? Could it come not as thunder, but as the soft strength of someone who stood beside her in silence? The cowboy, whose name she would later learn was Luke, finished hammering the last post into the earth as the sun began to fall into a pool of crimson and gold. And as he wiped his brow, he looked at her with eyes that seemed to see through walls she had built so high, and in that gaze she felt both the danger and the promise of something she feared, hope. Yet she forced her voice to be firm, thanking him curtly, telling him she could handle things from here, though her heart betrayed her with its racing, and he only tipped his hat with that quiet respect that unnerved her even more. "Maybe I'll ride by tomorrow to make sure the storm doesn't test your fence again," he said, almost casually, but to her it sounded like an invitation to something she wasn't ready to name. And that night, as Clara lay in bed, her hands still rough from work, she found herself thinking not of the fence, not of the cattle, not of the endless list of chores, but of the cowboy whose silence spoke louder than words. And for the first time in years, she feared the vow she had made might begin to tremble. But she reminded herself fiercely that she must stay strong, that she could not afford the pain of loving again, though deep within the seed of change had been planted. And the story of a woman who swore never to love, and a cowboy who carried healing in his quiet strength, had just begun. And dear listener, If you feel this stirring tale touching your own heart the way Clara's quiet awakening has begun, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, because more stories of courage, heartbreak, and unexpected love are waiting to ride into your soul, just like Luke rode into Clara's life. The morning sun rose like molten gold spilling over the horizon, casting long shadows across Clara's ranch as the scent of damp earth from the storm still lingered in the air. And though her heart had sworn never to bend again, she found herself standing by the window with restless thoughts, her eyes drifting unconsciously toward the road where Luke had ridden away the evening before, scolding herself silently for even hoping he might return. For she was not a woman who waited on anyone anymore. Yet when the distant sound of hooves reached her ears, her pulse betrayed her, quickening with an anticipation she dared not name. And there he was again, the quiet cowboy riding steadily, his presence unshaken by the weight of the world, as if he carried with him a calm that could soothe even the most stubborn storms within. And Clara told herself she should turn away, should ignore him. But when he dismounted and tipped his hat with that simple grace, she felt something soften against her will. "Fence still holding?" he asked, his tone gentle, more like a neighbor than a stranger. And Clara, folding her arms across her chest as if to shield her heart, nodded with a forced firmness. "It's holding just fine. Thanks to your help," she said. But the words came out softer than she intended, betraying her, and Luke only gave the smallest smile, not the smile of a man who wanted to conquer, but the smile of someone who understood the weight of silence. And when he offered to check the rest of the pasture with her, she surprised herself by agreeing, their boots crunching side by side over the dry earth, the quiet between them not heavy but strangely comforting, like two souls who did not need to speak much to understand each other. As the days turned into weeks, Luke began to appear more often, never overstaying, never intruding, sometimes helping with chores, sometimes simply fixing a broken hinge or bringing a bag of nails, without being asked. And Clara, though she tried to maintain her distance, began to feel the fortress around her heart tremble, for she noticed the way he listened, not with the impatience of a man waiting to speak, but with the patience of one who had learned the value of silence. And she found herself confessing little things, fragments of her story she hadn't spoken aloud in years, about her father, about the ranch, about the betrayal that had hardened her into stone. And Luke never pressed her for more, never pitied her, never told her how she should feel, and in that quiet acceptance she began to heal. Yet healing frightened her, for it meant hope, and hope was dangerous. So she told herself it was only gratitude, only companionship, only convenience. But late one night, when she watched him ride away under the moonlight, she felt an ache she could not deny, a longing that made her whisper into the dark, "Don't do this, Clara. You promised." But her heart answered differently, beating with a life she thought she had buried. The test came one fateful evening when a storm stronger than any before tore through the land, snapping posts and scattering cattle, and Clara, desperate and alone, ran into the downpour trying to gather her herd, her body trembling with exhaustion, until through the sheets of rain Luke appeared, his figure cutting through the chaos like salvation, his strong hands steadying hers, his voice calm even against the thunder. "You don't have to do this alone," he shouted above the storm, and in that moment something inside her broke, not in the way of pain, but in the way a prison gate finally gives way to freedom, and she let him stand beside her, let him share the burden, let him fight the storm with her. When at last the skies cleared and they stood drenched and breathless, Clara looked into his eyes and saw not the threat of heartbreak, but the promise of a man who knew loss as deeply as she did, a man who understood that love was not about possession or promises, spoken too quickly, but about the quiet act of showing up when the storms came. And for the first time in years, she let herself smile without bitterness, whispering with trembling lips, maybe I don't have to keep that promise I made to myself." And Luke, with that steady silence that said more than words ever could, only brushed a strand of wet hair from her face, his touch gentle, grounding, true, And under the vast sky of the Wild West, Clara realized that love could be rebuilt like fences, post by post, with patience, with strength, with trust. And though she had promised never to love again, she now understood that sometimes promises are made from wounds, not wisdom, and breaking them is the only way to heal. And dear listener, if this story of Clara and Luke has stirred your heart, if you believe in the power of love that rises from ashes, then make sure to subscribe to our channel, because countless more stories of courage, heartbreak, and healing love await to ride into your soul just like this one.